Deep in the Brazilian Pantanal, where rivers snake like veins in a living body, stories flow as free as water. The largest floodplain in the world is a place of ancient mysteries, where nature seems to hold secrets that men only dare to whisper. Amid alligators, capybaras, and the constant sound of birds, there is a legend that refuses to die, that of the Golden Serpent. They say that beneath the dark waters, a huge creature dwells, guarding a treasure that shines like the sun itself. A cursed gold, hidden since the times of the Bandeirantes, protected not by walls or traps, but by an ancient and vengeful spirit. The legend, told around campfires and rustic bars, is both a warning and a temptation. And before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now, let's get back to the story. The heat was suffocating in the heart of the Pantanal. The heavy air smelled of mud, decaying plants, and an invisible but almost palpable threat. Caio Duarte, an ambitious biologist, disembarked in a small village on the banks of the Paraguay River. He brought with him light luggage and a thick notebook, full of notes about one of the oldest legends in that region, the Golden Serpent of the Pantanal. Sitting in an improvised bar with worn wooden boards, Caio listened attentively to the stories of the local residents. An old man known only as Seu Bento, a guide with over 40 years exploring those treacherous waters, told the legend in a deep, slow voice. They say that the snake is not just an animal. It is an ancient spirit, guardian of riches lost by greedy bandeirantes. Those who seek her end up dead or mad. An uncomfortable silence took over the environment. The curious gazes of the few present were fixed on Seu Bento, who picked up his aluminum mug of cachaça and raised it to his lips as if sealing the story. However, Caio's eyes shone with excitement. "Do you really believe it exists?" Gaius asked, barely containing his anxiety. Seu Bento leaned towards the young man, his brown eyes penetrating. "You are not the first to ask this question, Doctor. But have you heard what happened to the others who tried to find the treasure?" "Mister." Bento lowered his tone. "They never came back." Despite the warnings, Caio was determined. He knew that science could not be held hostage by superstition. However, the interest in gold and the fame of discovering something so legendary also weighed on his decision. The next morning, to the sound of macaws echoing over the trees, Caio boarded a small wooden boat accompanied by Seu Bento and a local assistant called Rui, a young boy with an attentive look and few words. The group set off further down the river, entering increasingly dense areas where the vegetation seemed to swallow the sky. The trip did not take long to present its challenges. The boat's engine constantly failed, forcing Rui to row in narrower sections. The night in the Pantanal was a dark spectacle, the deafening croaking of frogs, the sporadic gleam of alligators' eyes on the surface of the water, and sometimes a deep sound, like distant thunder, echoing from the water. But there was no sign of a storm. Caio kept a detailed diary of the journey. In his last entry of the day, he wrote, "Something about this place is different. It's not just the beauty or the isolation. I feel like we're being watched." On the second night, as the group set up a makeshift camp, Rui pointed to a formation on the riverbank. It was a rock, weathered by time, but with something peculiar, inscriptions that seemed to represent a sinuous animal, perhaps a snake. The drawings were accompanied by markings resembling human eyes. "That's not natural," said Caius, kneeling down to examine it. Seu Bento, standing next to him, looked uncomfortable. "These rocks appear near where people report seeing things. It's better not to touch it." Caio ignored the warning. He touched the rock, feeling the trapped heat of the sun, but also something unexpected, a weak, almost imperceptible vibration, as if the stone was pulsing. That night, Caio's dreams were invaded by fragmented images. He saw the river turning into liquid gold and a colossal shadow emerging from the waters. He heard a guttural whisper that repeated a word that he couldn't understand, but that echoed in his mind even after he woke up. At dawn, the group found something even more disturbing: an abandoned canoe tangled in roots near the shore. Inside, there were scattered belongings and a partially wet diary. Caio leafed through the pages carefully. It belonged to someone called Jose Lorenzo, a gold miner. The last readable words were, "The thing is real. It saw me." Rui looked nervously at Seu Bento, who just shook his head. "Let's go. This place is not for people like us." But Gaius was obstinate. Jose Lorenzo's diary was solid proof that something, or someone, was behind the stories. He convinced the group to continue, but Seu Bento's eyes carried a mute promise of repentance. As the boat continued deeper into the watery labyrinth of the Pantanal, the sound of that distant thunder echoed again, this time louder. Rui was pale and muttered a prayer under his breath. Then, in the darkness of the water, something flashed. It was a small, golden reflection, as if something very large and very ancient was awakening. The golden light flickered again, disappearing into the muddy water like a reflection playing with the sun's rays. But the sun was hidden behind dense clouds. There was no logical explanation. This is not normal, Doctor," Rui whispered, squeezing the paddle tightly. Seu Bento stared at the river, his face hardened by tension. "It's not gold. It's a warning," said the old guide, lowering his voice as if he feared being heard. But for Caio, that was the sign he was waiting for. He knew they were on the right path. Ignoring his companion's protests, he instructed Rui to head in that direction. As they advanced, the surrounding landscape began to change. The trees seemed closer, their roots intertwining in bizarre, contorted shapes. On some of them, golden mosses grew, which glittered in the dim light. Rui began to murmur again, his prayers interrupted by the sound of the boat's engine sputtering, as if he were suffocated by the environment itself. "I don't like this," said Seu Bento as he turned off the engine to avoid damage. "We'll need to row from now on." Caio was unfazed. With his eyes fixed on Jose Lorenzo's sodden diary, he followed the notes that described the place as the last portal. It was there that the legend of the serpent came to life, where many had disappeared. As the oars cut through the silent water, a different sound emerged. It was a deep growl coming from the depths. Rui dropped the oar, almost capsizing the boat. "What was that?" he exclaimed, panting. Seu Bento just squinted his eyes, staring at the surface of the river. "Don't look at the water. Keep paddling." The old guide seemed to know something that the others didn't. But Gaius, with his scientific curiosity and skeptical spirit, ignored the warning and leaned over the side of the boat. The golden reflection reappeared, but this time with something more. A huge shadow moving almost imperceptible, as if a creature was beneath them. Suddenly the boat stopped. The mangrove roots had wrapped around the edges, trapping him. Rui tried to pull it back, but the roots seemed to move on their own. Caio, stubborn, jumped into the water to try to free the boat. "Are you crazy? Come back here!" shouted Seu Bento, but Caio ignored him. The water was warm, murky, and strangely heavy. As he pulled at the roots, something cold touched his leg. He turned around but saw nothing. Feeling his heart racing, he hurried to release the boat. When he finally did, he heard a scream. Rui was frantically pointing behind him. "Come back, Caio! There's something there!" Caius turned in time to see a sinuous shape emerge from the water, a scaly column, the width of a tree trunk. It glowed briefly, as if it were made of liquid gold. Before he could react, the column disappeared again, leaving the water swirling. Seu Bento pulled Caio back onto the boat with force. "The snake," muttered the old man, his eyes wide. "She's here." The group followed in silence, fear hanging over them like an unbearable weight. Further ahead, they reached a small clearing where the waters formed a calm lake. In the center, there was an island covered in twisted trees and golden flowers. It seemed like something out of a dream or a nightmare. "It's here," said Caio, holding Jose Lorenzo's diary. The notes described an identical location, but before they could disembark, something emerged from the waters around the island. Eyes. Two huge yellow orbs glowed on the surface, fixating on them. The boat shook violently as the snake appeared in full. It was colossal. Its skin seemed to be made of metallic scales, reflecting the light like pure gold. Its body snaked around the island as if it was protecting it. "For everything that is sacred," Rui stammered, crossing himself several times. "Don't make sudden movements," shouted Seu Bento. But Gaius was ecstatic. He had finally found the legendary creature. Ignoring the warning cries, he picked up his camera and started filming. The serpent seemed to watch every movement, its eyes shining with a dark intelligence. While the creature remained motionless, Caio noticed something on the island. Among the trees, there was a constant glow, piles of golden objects, coins, jewelry, and even ancient weapons. The treasure was real. He was so close. "We need to get there," said Caio, turning to the others. "Are you crazy? This thing is going to kill us," Rui protested. Seu Bento, however, seemed resigned. "She won't let anyone touch that. It's not gold, Caio. It's a trap." But the biologist didn't listen. He grabbed a small inflatable raft, something he had brought as a backup plan, and began rowing toward the island. The snake watched, motionless, but its eyes seemed more intense, more threatening. When Caio finally reached the shore of the island, he felt an inexplicable cold. The vegetation seemed alive, the trees whispered incomprehensible words. But the treasure glowed, calling to him like an irresistible promise. He reached out to pick up a golden coin, and the instant his fingers touched the metal, the ground beneath him began to shake. A deafening roar came from the waters. The serpent emerged with overwhelming fury, its gigantic body spinning like a hurricane. Seu Bento and Rui shouted for Caio to come back, but he was paralyzed, fascinated and terrified at the same time. The creature launched itself towards the island, its jaw opening in a scream that seemed to echo throughout the region. The serpent's roar reverberated through the waters, shaking the ground of the small island where Caio was. The gnarled trees seemed to lean, as if bent by the weight of the sound. The golden coin he held seemed to burn in his hand, but he refused to let go. Something inside him, a mixture of greed and fascination, kept him fixed in place. On the boat, Seu Bento and Rui watched in horror. Rui rowed desperately, trying to keep the boat away from the turbulence caused by the creature, while Seu Bento kept his eyes fixed on the snake. "He crossed the limit!" Rui shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "We have to leave now." But Seu Bento shook his head. "We can't leave him there. If we leave now, the snake will come after him, and after us." The guide took out a rusty harpoon that he kept on the boat, a relic of ancient fishing trips. Rui looked at him in disbelief. "Do you think this will work against that?" he exclaimed, pointing to the gigantic creature that snaked towards the island. "I don't know," replied Seu Bento with hardened eyes, "but I'll try." Meanwhile, on the island, Caio realized that something else was happening. The earth beneath his feet began to crack, and golden liquid oozed from the fissures, as if the island itself were alive and slowly dissolving. He tried to step back, but his legs felt heavy, as if the serpent itself had bewitched the environment around him. The creature raised its colossal head above Gaius, its eyes glowing brightly. She didn't attack right away. He seemed to be assessing the invader, as if deciding his fate. I just wanted to understand you," Caio murmured, almost in a whisper, still holding the coin. "You're not just an animal, are you?" Suddenly he heard something in his mind, a deep, whispered voice that seemed to come from all sides at once. "Why do you always take what doesn't belong to you?" Caio fell to his knees, stunned. He looked around, looking for the source of the voice, but he only saw the snake and the pulsing vegetation around him. "Can you speak?" he asked, trembling. The voice responded again, this time louder, echoing inside his head. "I am what you fear and desire. Gold is not a prize, it is a curse." Kaio finally released the coin, but it was too late. The earth beneath his feet gave way, and he fell into an underground cavern filled with a dazzling glow. Gaius landed heavily on the damp floor of the cave. His flashlight, miraculously intact, revealed the scenery around him. Piles of gold and ancient jewelry were scattered around, mixed in with human bones and scraps of equipment. He recognized one of them, a backpack with the name José Lorenzo embroidered on it. The treasure was real, but it was also a death trap. As Kaio tried to get up, he felt the ground vibrate again. He looked up and saw the serpent's head peering through the opening above. This time, the creature looked different. His eyes didn't just show anger, but something deeper, judgment. Suddenly he heard screams coming from the river. Rui and Soubento had arrived at the shore of the island. Rui seemed hesitant, but Soubento was walking towards the cave with the harpoon in his hands. "You're crazy! You won't survive!" Rui shouted from afar. "I'm not going to abandon the boy," replied Soubento, disappearing between the trees. The guide descended into the cave with firm steps, but his face showed his tension. He found Gaius standing surrounded by treasure, but unable to move. The serpent continued to observe them, like an impartial judge. "You need to get out of here now," said Soubento, pulling Kaio by the arm. "You don't understand, Bento," replied Kaio, almost ecstatic. "This is all an incredible discovery. If we take this evidence, do you think you'll make it out alive from this?" shouted the guide, his eyes shining with anger and fear. "That's not yours, Kaio. It never was. That's why she's here." Gaius hesitated. He knew that Bento was right, but the idea of abandoning that discovery was unbearable. That was when the voice returned, echoing in both of their minds. One must pay. Choose. The ground started to shake again. The golden bones seemed to melt into the ground, as if swallowed by an invisible force. The serpent descended deeper into the cave, completely surrounding them. "What does that mean?" shouted Kaio, looking at Soubento. The old guide closed his eyes for a moment, as if accepting the inevitable. "That means someone needs to stay, kid." Kaio looked at Bento, horrified. "You can't be serious." But the guide had already decided. He pushed Gaius towards the exit while holding the harpoon tightly. "Get out of here! Take care of what you saw and never come back!" shouted Soubento. Kaio tried to resist, but Bento was relentless. He pushed it into the exit tunnel as the serpent slowly advanced, its gigantic body blocking any further escape. Bento raised the harpoon, facing the creature with courage. "If that's what you want, come get me!" Gaius rose to the surface in time to hear the serpent's final roar. The cave shook and the entrance collapsed, burying Bento and the treasure forever. Rui, who was waiting on the bank, helped Kaio get back to the boat. The young biologist was in shock, unable to process what had just happened. When the boat's engine started and they set off, the sound of distant thunder returned, but this time it sounded like a wail. As they walked away, Kaio looked back. The island was still there, but it looked different, darker. The golden glow had disappeared. He knew he would never be the same after that experience. However, in his pocket, something weighed. He reached in and found the golden coin he thought he had dropped. His fingers tightened instinctively, and one last word echoed in his mind: curse. The boat crossed the dark waters of the Pantanal in silence, only the sound of the engine breaking the unsettling calm around it. Rui avoided looking at Kaio, who held the oar in his trembling hands, lost in thought. The events in the cave repeated themselves like a nightmare in his mind. The shine of gold, the resolute look of Soubento, and the final roar of the serpent. He couldn't accept it. Mr. Bento sacrificed his own life to save him, and now the weight of that act was suffocating him. At that moment, Kaio realized that the motivations that led him there were nothing more than greed and selfishness disguised as scientific curiosity. "Are you well?" asked Rui, finally breaking the silence. Kaio didn't respond immediately. He could still feel the coin in his pocket, its rough texture seeming to burn against his skin. When he finally looked at Rui, his eyes were empty. "I don't know. I don't know if I ever will be." Days later, the boat reached the village where the expedition had begun. Their arrival caught the attention of local residents, who looked on anxiously but without asking questions. Rui's look said it all. Something terrible had happened. While Rui tried to explain to the onlookers what had happened, Kaio isolated himself in a small room rented at the local accommodation. He refused to talk to anyone, even himself. In his mind, Bento's sacrifice echoed as a constant reminder of his failure. He spent hours staring at his small notebook. The words seemed empty, unable to capture the magnitude of what he had witnessed. But the diary wasn't the only object that haunted him. The golden coin was still in his possession, like a curse he couldn't shake. In a fit of rage, Kaio tried to throw her out the window, but his hand refused to let go. It was as if the coin had become part of him. Exhausted and defeated, he fell onto the bed, his dreams invaded again by the image of the serpent and the guttural voice that whispered a single word: choices. The next morning, Kaio was approached by Donna Clara, an elderly woman who was known as the village healer. Her eyes were deep and tired, as if she carried the weight of all the stories of that place. "You saw the serpent, didn't you?" she asked bluntly. Gaius hesitated. Part of him wanted to deny it, run away from the truth, but the intensity in Clara's gaze made him give in. "I saw it, and I lost a good man because of it." Donna Clara nodded slowly. "The snake is not just an animal, boy. She is an ancient spirit, a guardian. It is not there to protect the gold, but to test those who seek it. And you were tested." "So I failed?" asked Kaio, his voice full of despair. Clara shook her head. "You're still alive. That's more than many can say, but the question is, what will you do now?" Gaius was silent. He didn't have an answer. In the days that followed, Kaio began to feel the consequences of the coin. Little things started to go wrong. A glass falling off the table, a strange disappearance of his most important notes, and even nightmares that left him unable to sleep. But something worse happened when he tried to leave the Pantanal. As he got on the bus that would take him back to the big city, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. It was as if the air itself refused to let him go. He got out of the vehicle, feeling defeated. It was then that Rui appeared at his side. "Maybe this is a sign. You can't just walk away and pretend nothing happened." Kaio looked at the boy. Rui was right. He needed to find a way to honor Seu Bento's sacrifice and end that story once and for all. Guided by renewed determination, Kaio sought out Donna Clara again. He told her about the coin and what he felt whenever he tried to get rid of it. The old healer listened silently before taking out a small clay pot and handing it to him. "If you want to get rid of this curse, you need to return it to where it came from. But remember, this isn't just about the currency. It's about what it represents." "What if the snake appears again?" asked Gaius. Donna Clara smiled slightly, but her eyes were serious. "Then you will have to prove that you learned from your mistakes." With Rui by his side, Kaio prepared to return to the island. This time, not as an explorer seeking fame or wealth, but as someone seeking redemption. The boat advanced slowly through the dark waters of the Pantanal, guided only by the pale light of the moon. The air was thick and heavy, charged with an electricity that made your skin crawl. Kaio and Rui were silent, their minds occupied with what awaited them. On Kaio's lap was the small clay pot, sealed with wax that Donna Clara had melted onto the lid. She had warned, "The coin is just a symbol. The real challenge is facing the weight of your choices." And as they approached the island, the sounds of the Pantanal diminished. There was no croaking of frogs or the cry of night birds. Everything seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself was alert to what was about to happen. "Do you see that?" Rui broke the silence, pointing to the bank. The golden glow was back. It wasn't intense, but enough to stand out in the darkness. Kaio felt a tightness in his chest. He knew it wasn't gold. It was a warning. "We're close," said Kaio, his voice firmer than he expected. The engine was turned off, and Rui used the oars to steer the boat silently to shore. When they stepped onto dry land, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The trees seemed taller and the shadows deeper, as if the island had taken on a life of its own since our last visit. In the center of the island, the cave that collapsed with Sobento's sacrifice was still there. But something had changed. The stones that previously blocked the entrance were now displaced, forming a narrow opening. "She wants us to come in," said Rui, his voice shaking. Gaius nodded. With the clay pot in hand, he entered the cave, closely followed by Rui. The environment was even more oppressive than he remembered. The walls pulsed with a faint golden light, as if the gold were alive. Then she appeared. The serpent emerged from the depths of the cave with a graceful yet terrifying movement. Its body was colossal, the scales shining like liquid gold. His yellow eyes stared directly at Kaio, evaluating him. Rui took a step back, almost tripping, but Kaio remained motionless. He knew that running away was no longer an option. The serpent raised its head, emitting a deep sound that seemed to resonate within Caius's own chest. "I came to return what I took," he said, lifting the clay pot. The creature didn't move. He seemed to expect something more. "And I want to apologize. Not just for breaking into this place, but for not listening to the warnings. For not having respected Bento's sacrifice. He was a better man than me, and I was blind." The snake tilted its head slightly, as if it was considering his words. The silence that followed was so absolute that Kaio could hear his own labored breathing. "And now," muttered Rui. Kaio took a step forward with shaking hands and placed the pot on the floor. He took the coin out of his pocket, holding it between his fingers. She felt even heavier now, as if she carried the full weight of her guilt and regret. When he placed it inside the pot, something extraordinary happened. The cave began to shake, but not like before. The tremor was rhythmic, almost like a pulse. The surrounding golden light began to shine brightly, blinding Kaio and Rui for a moment. When his eyes adjusted, the serpent was closer, its head just a few feet away from Gaius. She lowered herself until her eyes were level with his. It was then that Kaio heard the voice in his mind again. "You learned." He didn't respond. He just nodded, feeling tears run down his face. The serpent opened its mouth, but instead of attacking, it let out a roar that reverberated throughout the cave. The sound was deafening, but it carried something more, an emotional weight, like an ancient lament. Suddenly, the golden glow began to dim, being sucked into the coin in the pot. When the light completely disappeared, the pot broke into pieces and the coin turned to dust. The serpent slowly retreated into the darkness, as if its mission was accomplished. Before disappearing completely, she looked at Gaius one last time, and he felt that something had changed. It was no longer just fear or respect, it was understanding. When they left the cave, the Pantanal looked different. The sounds had returned. The croaking of frogs, the distant song of birds. The night no longer seemed so oppressive. Rui looked at Kaio, his eyes still wide. "Is this over?" Kaio took a deep breath. He wasn't sure, but something inside him said yes. And for the first time in days, he felt hope. "It's over," he replied, his voice firm. When they returned to the village, Kaio decided not to remain silent this time. He told the story to Donna Clara and other residents, but without exaggeration or glorification. He spoke about the sacrifice of Sobento and the importance of respecting forces that we do not understand. Over time, the village began to look at the snake legend in a different way. She was no longer seen just as a threat, but as a guardian, not of gold, but of something much greater: balance. Years have passed since Kaio left the Pantanal. He now lived in a small house on the outskirts of Curitiba, surrounded by books, maps, and photographs of the Pantanal. Despite having chosen a path far from fame, his contributions to environmental preservation had become a reference. Their reports helped establish conservation areas and secure resources for local communities to protect the region's unique biodiversity. However, Caio never forgot the golden eyes that had watched him the last night in the Pantanal. One morning, while reviewing notes for a new lecture on human impact on fragile ecosystems, he received a letter. It was from Rui, now one of the most respected guides in the village. The letter was short, but it had a powerful message. Caio, the village has changed a lot since your last visit. The children still ask about you, especially when we tell stories about the Pantanal. One of them, Anna, says she saw two eyes shining in the water while fishing with her father. It seems that the legend still lives, and this gives us hope that the Pantanal will continue to be protected. Come visit us when you can. The letter brought a smile to Caio's face. He knew his life's work was far from over, but it was comforting to know he had inspired others to keep going. In the village, the changes were visible. The community had adopted sustainable ecotourism practices, and residents told Pantanal legends to educate visitors about respecting nature. Donna Clara, now older and in fragile health, continued to be a central figure, offering her wisdom to the young. Rui had assumed the role that Seu Bento had once been, guiding groups with the same seriousness and respect for the Pantanal. Whenever he spoke about Bento, his voice carried a tone of reverence, and he made a point of remembering that it was the guide's sacrifice that saved the village from greater consequences. One late afternoon, while working at home, Caio found something he had kept since his last visit, Seu Bento's diary. He opened it again, rereading the simple but powerful words. Bento's stories were like a manual of humility and wisdom, a reminder that the Pantanal was a place to be respected, not conquered. He closed the diary, took out his camera, and took a photo of the sunset through the window. The sky was painted orange and gold, reminiscent of the glow he had once seen in the cave. The golden serpent of the Pantanal was not just a legend for Caio. She was a symbol of balance, of sacrifice, and of the role everyone plays in protecting the natural world. And as long as he lived, he would do everything he could to honor that legacy. In Pantanal, during a peaceful night, two children played on the riverbank while their parents talked in the distance. One of them pointed to the water. "Look, golden shine," said Anna with wide eyes. "There is no such thing," replied the brother, laughing. But Anna was sure of what she saw, and when he looked at the water again, the glow was gone. Still, she knew in her heart that the legend of the serpent was still alive, watching, silent but ever present. And so the story of the golden serpent of the Pantanal continued, perpetuated by the mysterious waters and the stories of those who dared to know it. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support our work. See you in the next video.